Okay, we're here with Lance Geiger, the history guy, and also of the History Guy Kids, right? You have two channels on
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah. Actually, that's my nephews that do that, and it's just because they kind of enjoy the history guy, so they wanted to make something that was for kids. But we've only got a few of those episodes up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Andrea introduced me to your channel, and Andrea is my producer, and she's the one who reached out to you. But she introduced me to your channel, and she said she was a fan of yours, and then she just checked in with it, and she noticed this guy's got 1 million viewers. She kind of thought it was her and a couple of other people watching your videos, but it's enormously popular. So I want to I'm really interested in how you've done it, because I have a bunch of followers on Twitter. I have a bunch of people on Instagram. YouTube, nobody watches my videos on YouTube, and I could never really figure it out, but you've seemed to have mastered it. But let's do your whole origin story. I guess starting with your history. Are you a history teacher?
No, I mean, I did teach college for many years, but I was actually a speech communication teacher. I taught public speaking, and I was a coach for a public speaking team.
There you go. See, that's it. I mean, I don't know if it's media savvy, but you're a good speaker, and that's the secret. So I would say that you've got a great channel, you've got history, but I think the real thing is communication, right? That's what's made you attractive to viewers. Am I right?
As much as I know, yeah, I think so. I like to be a storyteller, and I think that I tell them well enough that people want to watch. So yeah, you're right. I've got about 1.3 million subscribers on the channel. I mean, it's interesting because I'm from South Dakota. It's about 400,000 more people than live in South Dakota.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the origins of the channel, when did you start making YouTube videos, and what kind of inspired the first video?
So I started in March of 2017, and what inspired the first video was I got laid off. I was working in a standard job. I sold insurance, actually, with a big health insurance company.
Yeah.
With Obamacare and some other stuff there, my division kind of got laid off, and I was expecting I'll just stay doing what I was doing. It's sort of industry where people do that. You just get hired somewhere else, and stuff kind of kept falling through. So I'd have a job and then say, "Oh, we need you to move," and I couldn't move or something like that. So I had this job, and I had a really good line on this job, and it would have been a really good job. And she said on Friday, she said, "You're perfect for this job. Expect for HR to call you on Monday." And so I'm excited, I'm reemployed. And then they don't call on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. So on Thursday, I call her and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Over the weekend, our company got acquired." And I went from hiring to laying off. And that told me maybe I'm not supposed to be selling insurance. So my whole life, I would just be sitting, I would just start telling stories about history, and people would say, "You should do that for a living." And I would love to have. I just had no idea how to do that. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to try something different. I'm not going to go back to the cube. I've got some money, and so I'll start a YouTube channel and talk about history and see how that goes.
Wow. So it really was a venture. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm making videos, and then all of a sudden people were like, "Hey, you should really do this full time." You kind of were like, "Let's start this channel." So what did you do?
I jumped in both feet. Yeah.
Yeah. And what'd you do? Buy lights and a camera and equipment, things like that?
Yeah, I made an episode on my iPad, and it was absolutely horrible. So I went over to Best Buy and happened to get a really good camera that had been returned. So it was on a really good deal, and I still use that camera. I have 3 of them now. Slowly, I mean, if you look at my earlier videos, the lighting's not very good and the sound's not very good. I've gotten better microphones and lights over time. And if you do well in YouTube, you should reinvest some in your channel and your technology. But the key on YouTube, though, is that any overhead, I mean, the margin's fairly thin. And so if you're paying someone to do your production, or if you're paying someone to do your lighting, if you're whatever, I mean, every dime you pay out, that's cutting into, really good videos. It's going to make a couple $1,000s. And so my goal was to do it all in-house and make it good enough so that if, to make it better would be a much higher increase in cost, that wouldn't be worth it. So I do it all myself. I kind of followed my nose on the internet and found a program for video processing, which I had never done before. And I just started doing it. And then the more you do it, you get better some things as you go along. But it took me, I mean, YouTube is so strange because when you start, they recommend you based on how well you're doing. Yeah. So if you start and no one's watching you, then it's a very slow start. And my thinking at the time was I just need to get a good deal of content up. I have to have enough stuff up that people can look at it and they'll find it. And if they find me, that they'll go watch the other stuff. So I did by, say, that was in March. By midsummer, I had gotten enough views that I could monetize, but I really wasn't making any money. By the end of the year, after what was that, 7 months, 8 months of effort, I had made, actually closer to 9 months, wasn't it? I had booked 90 cents. So I was, I'm like, is this going to work out? And then in February of the following year, so it's been about a year, one of my videos caught and got, a couple of tens of thousands of views. And from then on, it just went up and up and up. By the following August, I was paying the rent. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So back to a couple of questions, because you said, first thing you said was, even a good video, you make a couple $1,000s. And then the other thing you said was things got okay, and then I could monetize. So what are those two thresholds? What does YouTube require you before they start paying you? And what that is basically revenue sharing of the ads that they pop into it. Is that right?
It is, and those honestly I don't know off the top of my head because the numbers have changed since. But it was a number of views is what it took. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things. There's subscribers. I mentioned those at the beginning. You don't really get paid by subscriber, but more subscribers means that your content is recommended to more people when you post new stuff. But the number of views is how many times people have watched a video. And I mean, it used to be only like a 10,000 threshold or something like that when I passed it, and that means that it's big enough that they can monetize. And now I think it's probably much higher, but I don't know. And so those it sits out there. You collect up views, but then they still have to. They sell ads. Google sells the ads, and it's called through something called AdSense. And then they have to decide that yours is the right kind of channel to put an ad in there. And then they put the ad in, and if it makes revenue by people watching it, they split that half and half with you. So it's kind of like you make a TV show, and they pay you half of what they get from the sponsors.
Yeah. Have you ever had any video that was flagged for content? Like you might have been talking about Napoleon, and YouTube was like, hey, don't throw shade on Napoleon.
That's not quite what happens, but it's a slow process to understand. And it's interesting for history because there's a lot of things YouTube kind of doesn't like that are really history. That would be a good history documentary. So you can't monetize anything that mentions 9/11. I mean, if it even kind of comes up, then they're gonna flag that. They're gonna demonetize that. And when you understand the process, you can work around it. And it does mean that I have to kind of not talk about some history I'd like to talk about. But when you start to understand the process, but the way that they explain that to me, and the cool thing is, once you get big, then you actually get people at YouTube, human beings, can actually explain things to you. When you're small and you're going through the little, like the little customer service tool, you're lucky to get anybody. And if you get them, you don't know that they're going to know anything. But the way that's been explained to me is that advertisers don't want to look like they are profiting off of something like 9/11. And so I can do war videos, but I can't show casualties. I can't show anybody that's been shot. I can't show anybody that's got a bandage on. And so you just, how you pan over the pictures and it's different if it's a painting or something like that than if it's real. And so you can talk about some topics, but you really have to kind of just avoid the more salacious parts of them that might offend or shock a viewer. Yeah. Even if you get an age flag, and my audience is not a kid's audience, but even if you get an age flag that says only for 18 plus, then it will significantly reduce the number of views that you get. So you just kind of learn where the lines are, and you just kind of walk those lines. I mean, that's television too, right? I mean, there's going to be a question of how much censors are going to allow before they let you be on the show.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's definitely happening in television. But do you think it's more do you think YouTube is more censoring than network TV? For instance, let's just take the History Channel. The History Channel, I'm sure, can show people getting shot, right? But you can't.
So in some ways, yes. But the History Channel also knows who they're buying for their advertisers, and so there's things that I can't monetize on YouTube that if that was a documentary on television, no one would mind if you were putting commercials in there. Yeah. So, and part of that is just because it's automatic. I mean, there's so many YouTube channels that YouTube can't really go put a lot of extra thought into. Is this different? But so at first, if you're just very frustrated, you're like, this is good history. This is just history. It's just education. And then after a while, finally, actually, I was part of a pilot program where you would send the video in ahead of time and they would tell you what the problem was or stuff like that. And I just figured out the system and figured out what you could do. And
that's good.
Still get caught every now and again with something that, confuses me or, that I didn't know. I had one it occurred in Africa, and I was using some essentially National Geographic shots. I mean, there were some background pictures of villages and the women had their tops off, and that's just how they do things in Africa, like from the 1930s.
Yeah.
And the thing got flagged as if I was shoving naked pictures on there.
Yeah.
And so you have to go in and blur the little picture of the little African women from 1930 so that they're not showing their parts. And you just get used to it. Yeah.
In the old days, the networks were worried about people picking up their phones and calling in and saying, "Did you hear what Jack Parr said to so and so? That was offensive." And so they were afraid of feedback. But the funny thing is, in this day and age, you have an AI program essentially that's scanning video, and if they see flesh, then they're going to say, "Oh, that's pornography or over 18." And so the AI is more unforgiving than the old network censors.
Absolutely,
I think.
yeah. It's got no ability to sort of reason through and think whether something's good or not. So yeah, I had one not too long ago where at the end it turns out this guy that was the kind of the main person throughout the history. At the end, he committed suicide during the Great Depression, and I just mentioned that at the end, and it got flagged. Can't talk about suicide. So I mean, and it was just a teeny little piece of this, and it was sad to me because it was kind of a capstone ending to what had happened to this guy over his career. But I just said, my viewers don't know how he died. I had to pull that out. So if you have a person, you could say, I'm not making a big deal of this. I'm not throwing emotion at this. It's a teeny little part of it. So, but they do have rules, and they do have a lot of podcasts and things like that themselves where they'll talk to you about those rules. That really does help it out. But it's weird because they're more loose-say on video game violence than they are on history or education. So there's people that are on there all the time just shooting people in the face, and no one cares. And they'll say, you can cuss, just don't do most of your cussing in the first 30 seconds. I mean, that's an odd rule, but okay.
It's amazing, really. Let's take an example, because you said like 9/11. Obviously, you can't show footage 9/11. You got the buildings, the airplanes, all that stuff. But the way you just said it, you said, you said 9/11 on my thing. So do you think that would saying 9/11, does that get you flagged on YouTube?
Or get you knocked off of YouTube? No, I don't think so.
No.
But I mean, I have one that it's actually a history of firefighters. But it's got a tribute to the firefighters of 9/11 at the end, and that was apparently too much. I have another one on something called the Sigonella incident, which was if you remember the Achille Lauro hijacking, which was back in the 80s, so it's been 50 years now. And after the Achille Lauro hijacking, Reagan essentially hijacked the hijackers and took them to Italy. And that one's demonetized because you can't talk about Middle East terrorism because that's too controversial a subject. And so, which is odd to me, that we can't talk about this historical event that happened, 50 years ago. So you probably won't get flagged for me. So I hope not. You won't get flagged for me just saying that here. But if you make that the subject, and so then it sounds like some advertiser is going to say, oh, they're trying to get me to make money off of tragedy or whatever. Then that's where they flag. And I'm big enough that when I do get flagged, I can't appeal. And my appeal, I can actually get an appeal. If I appeal through the system and it says, no, it's still denied, then I send to my YouTube person and we can appeal to a person. And we've been able to do a little bit more because I'm big enough, there's enough that'll actually get to a human can say, oh, yeah, you're right. That shouldn't have been flagged.
Yeah. And so you're kind of, I see people on Twitter all the time. They post, they say, hey, look, this just got taken down from YouTube. So they're kind of, complaining out there in public, but you seem to have a good relationship with YouTube. Do you avoid, getting into public spats with them because you want to stay kind of in good? I
kind of did get in the public. I was so upset about one once that I suggested that my viewers send emails to the president of Google.
Yeah,
but I don't know how many did, but honestly, Google didn't seem to get me. YouTube didn't get mad at me, but that I did end up, working through this program to figure out how to keep stuff from being demonetized. So maybe the president of Google made them do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But actually, as I figured it out over time, I understand. I mean, YouTube there's a lot of ways why YouTube is a great space. It's very difficult to make money off a podcast. It's very difficult to make money off a blog because they go out through all these different channels. But YouTube so owns the video space that they can sell a lot of ads because that's where most of the audience is going to come. But there's so much content uploaded to YouTube that you can't have people looking at the content. You couldn't have enough people to do that, and it would be far too expensive. And so they have to use a lot of these AI tools. These AI tools aren't very bright, but once you understand the AI tools, then you can you can game the system and know what you can do and what you can't do. And from a history perspective, if it was just my channel, there's probably some things I would talk about that I just, I see the topic and I say that's too likely to get demonetized.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the actual numbers are, but I pay whatever the money is. I pay for the premium subscription, so I don't have to look at those ads.
Oh yeah, yeah. I always suggest that. People will complain about the ads sometimes. I'm like, it used to be called YouTube Red, but I think it's called YouTube Premium now. Yeah. It's totally worth it. If you watch a lot of YouTube, it's totally worth it to avoid the ads, and that's great because if someone who has YouTube Premium watches my video, I just get a chunk of the YouTube Premium money. I don't have to worry because an ad, you might get money if it just shows, or you might not get money unless someone lets it go all the way through past the skip point, or you might only get money if somebody actually clicks through the ad. You never know, what's going to happen with an ad. But YouTube Premium, that just means if you're watching it, then you don't have to deal with the commercials. And I actually automatically kind of get some money. And I always pay for YouTube Premium. I watch a lot of YouTube. I can't imagine the number of ads I would have to kind of sit through. But I can say if you like a creator and you like their stuff, then watch the ad. Or if you're not premium, premium's good, but watch the ad, or at least let it sit past the point where it says, click away from the ad, and that way your creator is going to actually get paid for the ad since they're there. But I have people complain. Right now we're getting political ads, and people complain like, I don't want a political ad. I'm like, why would I? If you don't like the guy, I don't send him money, but he still has to pay me. So I mean, why would I pass up? Yeah, pass up the whoever wants to advertise. I'm not responsible for what they advertise, but I need the revenue.
Exactly. Well, obviously, with a political ad, even if you say, "Hey, support my advertisers," you're not really saying, you have to vote for my advertisers.
Yeah, that's it. Well, the Google ads, I don't control at all. As a matter of fact, those are customized to the viewer. So it's not like my show will have these ads. It's if you're watching, these are the ads they send to you. They're targeting you specifically. Yeah. So another way you make money on YouTube is that you can have a sponsor say, I want a sponsored video, and they pay me directly. And there's some YouTube rules to it, but they pay me directly, and I build an ad into my episode. And that's different than Google ads. And those I'm fairly picky about because I try very hard to, be middle of the road, not offend people, let them make their own decisions sort of thing. So I certainly don't choose anything that would be too controversial there. But I do a lot of like VPNs and video games. And anybody wants to come to me, we look them over, and we don't want to do too many of those because if you're paying for YouTube Premium, then you're still getting an ad if I do that. But those really make a huge difference because you know how much money that video is going to make. And that's really, really helpful because I don't know from month to month how much I'm going to get out of the YouTube audience. And
the advertisers, do they approach you, the companies, or is it some kind of ad service?
You can do a service. There's a lot of them that will offer you to. We haven't seen very good deals come out of the service. So it's simply, my channel is now big enough that someone who says, that's a good place for us, they'll come through an agency. And the agency will contact us and say, can we do, one or two ads, a couple of runs, and they're, I don't make huge amounts of money or anything like that, but I mean, they'll be enough that it helps I have 2 employees in addition to me now, and it, make sure we make payroll. That's important. And then we see what else comes in through YouTube. Yeah.
Okay. So 2 employees, you do it out of your home. You've kind of kept it low budget. Most of it is advertising. Do you sell any? Everybody's always selling mugs and tumblers. Do you do any merch?
I do. I sell T-shirts. I sell mugs. I sell. Let's see what I got. Well, I'm wearing it. Yeah. T-shirt.
THG.
We make challenge coins. Those are we do.
Oh, those are nice.
Challenge coins. Yeah, they're not expensive, but actually that was I had a guy who was a former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard, that's the highest ranking non-commissioned officer in the Coast Guard. He's only one at a time, and he represents all the non-commissioned officers to the commandant. And so this guy had that position, and he sent me his coin. He says, "I love your channel, and by the way, you should do an episode on challenge coins." So I couldn't say no to Vince Patton, the former Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. Yeah. So I did. And since then, they send us challenge coins. People send them all the time because the militaries make them and police forces and fire departments and stuff. And so we make coins so that if anybody sends us one, we can send them one back. And you get those on the webpage too. I don't make a lot of money on Merc. I always tell people, I think the vast majority of the T-shirts I've sold, my mother bought. But some people do. And occasionally you bump into someone who's wearing your shirt and you're like, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, mugs and tumblers must be the cheapest thing to make because that's what every podcaster buy a tumbler. So
Yeah.
it's like
But I got tote bags. I think I have phone cases still. We have beer mugs. We have a lot of stuff. Yeah,
it's great.
That's cool because the companies that'll do that for you and they set up a website for you and everything like that. But for the most part, they don't do production, or they do small production runs. They don't do production until someone buys it, and so you don't have this huge upfront cost of buying 300 T-shirts and hoping you're going to sell them.
Warehouses.
Yeah, they don't tend to, and so you can do that fairly inexpensively, and it's a way to make money. It's a way to get your name and your brand out there.
Yeah, people like to be part of that club. So let's talk about your fans. What kind of, how would you classify your demographic? Like, who loves your show? I'm assuming obviously history buffs, but do you know much about the demographics of your audience?
Yeah, YouTube gives actually pretty good reporting for that, and they look like me. They're mostly old dudes. My audience is 93% male. It mostly skews older. That's not the key YouTube audience, except that if you're aiming for that 20-year old video game audience, that's where all these YouTube channels are aiming for it.
Yeah.
So the cool thing about an older audience with me is that there's less competition for it, and when they sell ads, a lot of the ads for mine are more likely to be something like investment or something like that, where they pay a little bit more, because they're expecting that my audience actually has a little bit of money in their pocket to be able to do things.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's my. I mean, I don't have groupies. I have a mix, and I've met kids that are History Guy fans, but for the most part, I have a kind of an older male audience. It's mostly an American audience, so we've got a lot of people coming in from Canada and Great Britain and Australia as well.
Yeah, and there was a thing a couple of months ago that everybody was talking about. I know we were talking about it on the different chat shows and things. Was that men just spend a lot of time thinking about the Roman Empire, right? Did you hear that one?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. They think, what's he thinking of? And he's thinking of the Roman Empire. I think so. It might be more of a love of history. It might simply be. The rule I always have used, which I think is maybe the biggest key to my success, is I always tell myself, make videos you would watch. If I watch my video and I'm like, ugh, I wouldn't watch that, then I'm obviously doing something wrong. So I just aim for my sensibilities and assume someone else must like the same things I like. And that seems to have worked out, but maybe that's why I'm drawing kind of the audience that I am. We've tried to aim for younger audiences at times, and honestly, you just can never predict it. So what I do is I pick a story that I want to tell that I think will be a fun story, and I tell it. And sometimes it does really, really well, and sometimes it does a little less well. But I don't worry who I think is going to want to watch that. I just put it out there, and they find their audience. Yeah,
I would say that if you look at my subscriptions, it is probably a lot of middle-aged white guy subscriptions because we've got James Gurney, who's a painter. He's one of my favorites, and he's kind of like, remember the old Bob Ross? You would paint with Bob Ross. This guy James Gurney is kind of like a modern YouTube version of Bob Ross, but he goes into the woods, he takes out his watercolors, he paints the scenery, and he shows you how he does it. And I'll kind of paint along with him. I love that, And then you got ham radio. There was it's called Ham Radio Crash Course. When I was learning about ham radio, of course, I wanted to find out on YouTube. This guy has this thing, Ham Radio Crash Course. It's not really a ham radio crash course as much as it is just talking about ham radio, but I follow him, and I'm sure it's a bunch of middle-aged guys as well. So this kind of world.
I mean, there's a lot of us, but I mean, if when you get to our age, and I imagine we're roughly in the similar. I mean, you at least have some money in your pocket, and you have a little bit of time, and you're willing to go watch. But I mean, it's an interesting place. I mean, there are people who really just know how to do something, like a plumber or a farmer who can just give a piece of advice. I have a friend who retired and bought a farm. He'd never been a farmer before. He says, I'm a YouTube farmer. Every time something goes wrong, I just go look it up on YouTube, and there's someone who will explain it to you. They might be terrible communicators. They might not have any idea how to make a video, but if they can tell you how to fix your sink, they might get an awful lot of views.
Yeah.
So there's that crew there too. Mine is, I mean, I think history buffs like what I'm doing, but I've had people say I didn't really like history until I started watching your show because of my whole philosophy is that history is a really good story, and it's often better stories than fiction. And so I try to tell like a nice, fun, compelling, interesting story. I mean, it might not be fun. It might be, it might be poignant. It might be whatever, but something that really gives you, something from your 10 or 15 minutes. And that can be a broader audience than just what you'd expect. But I mean, who has time to watch YouTube? I don't know. I don't know why my audience is 93% male, and I don't know if I was a female presenter as opposed to a male presenter doing the same thing, if I would get as much male, maybe I get more male audience. I don't know. The reason I can't succeed on Instagram is I look terrible in a bikini, but on YouTube that hasn't seemed to matter. Maybe if I look good in a bikini, I would have a different audience. I have no idea. I just tell stories I like to tell, and that seems to attract enough people to pay the rent.
Well, your bow tie is kind of like your, it's like a little.
It is sort of my thing, and it is actually. I have the little blue bow tie is actually a trademark that I own. But the bow tie was just at first all I knew is I've always kind of believed if you're making a presentation, you should dress up a bit. So most of YouTube is done, people are just wearing whatever they're wearing. But I always wore a jacket or something like that. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I do know I have that rare skill. I knew how to tie a bow tie, and I had a handful of them. And so one day I was like, what I'm going to wear, and I just put on the bow tie, and I probably had 1,000 people watching the show at the time, and everybody's like, "That's really cool." And I thought, that's you don't see them very often anymore, but it's kind of that old idea. You watch the old documentaries, and there'll be just some dusty old professor sitting in an office with books behind him, and he's wearing a bow tie. So I said, well, that's kind of what I was going for. So now, man, if I show up without the bow tie, I get in trouble. And people, if they see me out in the world, they're like, "You're not wearing a bow tie." And I'm like, "What? No, I don't usually wear them on the airplane, but I can tie one really quickly if you want to see."
Have you ever done a video on the History Guy channel showing people how to tie the bow tie?
I have not. I have people ask all the time, and I don't know why I've avoided that, but I might at some point, because I actually have some. If you want to learn how to tie a bow tie, I have some tricks that can make that a lot faster. I know.
Yeah, I need a trick. Because listen, I tie a bow tie. I sing in a barbershop quartet, so you also have to know how to tie both a straight tie and a bow tie in barbershop. But we're always helping each other out before a show when we're doing our ties, and it's that loop in the back. It's getting the loop. Getting your finger into that loop so you can stuff the thing through, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the knot itself is the same knot used to tie your shoe. It's not a complex knot, but the problem is you're usually you're not trying to tie your shoe here. The big trick to tying a bow tie is tie it around your leg about 20 times, and you will find it's very easy to do after that. Use your leg instead of your neck, and just sit and then tie the bow tie and untie it, and do that about 20 times, and you will find it's very easy. Your fingers just know what to do to tie the
your leg, like your ankle or your thigh.
Your thigh. So you're sitting, so you can look at it and see it. Yeah, and then just tie the bow tie around there, and that way it's much easier to see. That's more like tying your shoe. It's much easier to see what's going on, and that's where you get that feel for why it's wide in some places and narrow in other places. And that was that. I mean, that just makes it much easier for you to figure that out, how that's going to go sideways.
I'm going to do that, and then, but I'm going to lock the door first, because if someone walks in on me and I'm tying a bow tie around my thigh, it's not a good look.
I would imagine, though, there's worse things they could walk in on. You could at least explain what you're doing. If you were tying it around something else, I will not take responsibility for that. But your leg, you could just say, "I'm learning how to tie a bow tie."
And I'd get, the YouTube video would get banned anyway at that point.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah. Sure.
So let's go to one of your videos, the one about the 1977 blackout.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah, the New York City blackout.
So when you're doing these, I'm assuming you're like, "Oh, let's talk about the blackout," because you know it in your head. You're like, "Oh, that blackout." And then what do you do? Where do you go for research?
I'm a web researcher. I mean, which is not great for history, but I just, I'm making 3 videos a week. I'm not going out to, dig up primary sources. So I've just become very, very good at Google and finding a lot of sources to work from. And honestly, the biggest trick there is finding media that's in the public domain. So that one was a very difficult video. Because it's not, if it's government, it's military or something like that, the picture's almost always in the public domain. But if it's outside of that, they're very rarely in the public domain. 1977, I mean, you have to go back to 1927 to be in the public domain. So actual pictures of the actual summer of 1977 that you are allowed to use that aren't someone else's property are really hard to find. And so if you watch carefully in that video, there's not an actual photograph anywhere in there of the New York City blackout. It's a bunch of generic stuff of pictures of New York City and pictures of thunderstorms. And there's really? I'm talking about, I think, who was it? There was a criminal that was going on that summer.
Son of Sam.
Son of Sam, yeah. So, I mean, I just found some 70s police car pictures that were in the public domain. They weren't New York City police cars, so I just kind of panned so you couldn't see that it was someone else's police car. So that, the images are tough for me because I want to respect people's copyright. I want them to respect copyright on my stuff. but some are very difficult to find material for. And so that was a really interesting from that. I mean, to research the blackout, I just said, you can always go find newspaper accounts and things like that. A part of it's just figuring out what from all of that stuff will tell a good story, and it will have a good narrative to it. And some things are easier to research than others.
Yep. And so you don't do, you talked about at one point, some of your viewers were like, oh, I don't want to see political ads. You stay away from politics.
I try to, yeah.
Contemporary politics, but you have to talk about politicians all the time. For instance, you talk about Mayor Beam, you talk about Ed Koch and how that kind of started his career. I wasn't really realizing that it was kind of the downfall of Beam, which brought along
Ed Koch. Yeah, bringing back New York was in bad financial shape, and that, I mean, some people could get upset. There's not a lot of people who are still worrying about the mayoral election of Ed Koch.
Yeah,
but I try not to present it as a position as who is a good politician or a bad politician. I just try to tell the story, and that's kind of old school. When I was studying history, how long ago was that? I don't know. James Buchanan was president, 1940 or something. Back when I was in college in my day, I remember actually, I think it was from the New York Times, but paraphrasing, it essentially said that it's not the job of the historian to tell people what to conclude. It's the job of the historian to give them the information they need to draw their own conclusions. And so that's why I kind of try to duck politics. I mean, if I was more directly political and showed a political bent, that might get more views, it might get less views. But I don't want people to say, I don't want to learn the history because I disagree with him over whether Ed Koch was a good guy. And so I just simply try to tell the story. This is what happened with Ed Koch, and let you decide, And all the time, my videos, I'll do something and someone will say, oh, that sounds like, Trump. That sounds like Clinton. That sounds like Obama. That sounds like Biden. And two comments next to each other will say, one will say that sounds like Biden. One will say that sounds like Trump. I love that. I love that my audience can look at it and come to different conclusions. Yeah. And that's why I kind of just duck. It's not that I'm not a political person. It's just that I really hope people watching my channel have no idea what my politics are.
However, I feel like everybody is an armchair historian these days, because you'll say something. Say there was one about it was a Napoleonic kind of video that you did recently, and I would assume some people would be coming in with the comments saying that's not the way it happened, or say the French Revolution. Everyone has an opinion whether the French Revolution was a good thing or a bad thing. People will say I'm Catholic, so there's a lot of times people will have a video and then the Catholics will say, look at this, you're misinterpreting what the Catholic Church did with Galileo. So do you get a lot of people fighting over what the real issue is?
And I mean, for the most part, no. I mean, if you can thumbs up a video, and the thumbs up versus thumbs down on my channel is usually around 90% thumbs, 99% thumbs up, between 98 and 99%. And so I don't get a whole lot of that because I just try not to take sides. But I mean, every time, you can't say anything in the world today without offending someone. Every time you make a video, there's someone who gets upset for some reason. I did one on a interesting scandal with Apollo 15, where they brought some envelopes along, and then the astronauts were selling them. They weren't supposed to, and it was a deal. And back then, anyway, I somehow attracted the crowd that don't think we've gone to the moon, and they say that quite a lot on there. So some people were upset about that. So you can't talk and not get some people upset. And they say don't read the comments. I still do. You just kind of have to duck some. You need to control your comments on YouTube. So if someone's getting too feisty in a way that might hurt your channel, you're perfectly allowed to remove the comment and block them so they can't comment anymore. And I do that if someone gets too upset.
But a comment will hit your advertisers?
Well, I mean, if I certainly don't want the advertisers don't really watch the comments, but I certainly don't want someone to try to get me canceled or something like that. But I mean, if they're getting so insulting in the comments that if someone else were to read that, they would say, I don't want to watch this channel. I don't want that I don't want that comment there. I don't need to put up with that. It's YouTube. I can just remove the comment. Yeah. I don't think for the most part anybody looks at the comments but me. But sometimes you put up a video and people are here. I say I'm just here for the comments. But I try very much to walk a line where they're not going to tell me you're telling the history wrong. I try to walk a line where if there's some controversy over what happened here, then I present both sides, and I tend to focus on the story. And we do pretty well. But I mean, every every single video, there's going to be somebody who's going to find some reason that they don't like what you said, and that's that's just part of living on the media these days. If you want to be a YouTube star, you got to put up with the whatever people want to say.
Yeah. Are there any kind of history battles? Like, who is your competition? Dan Carlin was very big, and for a while I listened to the Hardcore History podcast. You know Dan Carlin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good podcast. I don't think of anybody as competition. I just don't. I mean, there's so much on YouTube, and so actually, I've had the opportunity to meet some of the big history YouTubers and some of my I consider them friends. But certainly you can see. But I mean, it's interesting. You ask about my audience. I'm not a political guy at all, but you do get to see on your channel what your audience watches. And the number one for the entire history of my channel, always what's been number one on that is Fox News. And so I'm not aiming specifically for a specific crowd or something like that, but I mean, that might have to do with the age and the demographic. But when I run into some of the history channels that they're also watching, I really get the idea that they're not competing with me. Them watching that history is only bringing them to me. Maybe I'm bringing them to them. And we're all talking about history. So it's not like we, like there's two shows in the 9 o'clock time slot and we have to beat each other. So I don't see any of them as competition. And for the most part, we history geeks, we're not always the most social, but for the most part, they're nice guys and, fairly easy to talk to. And we can help when there's something like, oh, why are my videos getting demonetized? Then, we can kind of talk to each other and say, well, this is what I learned and this is how you might avoid that.
I remember some time ago, because this was kind of pre-YouTube, I was always a fan of Simon Schama. Do you know that name, Simon Schama?
That name does not sound familiar.
It's Schama. He's a British guy, but he did a television documentary called The Power of Art. And he also did, I think, A History of Britain, another, back when I was watching VHS history specials and things like that. I loved his History of Britain. I loved The Power of Art. And then I was reading one time, looking for some other Simon Schama information, and I heard some historian bemoaning the Schamification of history because Simon Schama was good on TV in the way that a lot of scientists didn't like Carl Sagan. They thought he was a TV scientist because he made science accessible to regular people. I first was turned on to science, astronomy because of Carl Sagan, and then later on I find out that the astronomer snobs, they say, oh, he's a TV guy, he's not a real thing. Have you noticed there's some kind of intellectual snobs who kind of look down on YouTube historians?
Oh, yeah. I actually have had an opportunity a couple of times to go to academic scholarly historian conventions. Yeah. And we, PhDs, these guys chair at Harvard or whatever. And they call us public historians. And that is done with there's definitely a tone to it.
Yeah. So that's it. That's like the Schamification line.
I'm not writing books, and I don't know. I mean, I've never had a conversation with one where they say I can't stand your channel because I don't like your history. Yeah. But I know that they're not the kinds that think that telling a 15-minute story that's interesting to hear is going to be the sort of history you want to tell. They want to talk broad themes and perspectives and all sorts of things. And it's really interesting to go to a conference because you'll get to hear kind of where the discipline is at a particular time. It can be. For what I do, it can be kind of dry. But I was at a conference and they were kind of saying, but the problem is the public doesn't listen to us. And that's where I was able to chime in and say, anybody outside of this room isn't going to pick up a 500-page book and read it on this subject. And says, if you want to, you got to talk to them in tones that they'll understand. And they nodded their head and they acted like that was interesting. And I've never heard from any of them since. So they didn't seem to want my advice on the subject. But absolutely, yes. I'm not an academic historian. I don't cite my sources in the way that you would expect. But I mean, the historians that I loved reading, like McCullough and Ambrose, they have very low opinions of, and they speak in just very almost like disgusted terms that person got to be famous because they don't think that they're serious enough. So if you are presenting in such a way that a wider audience is going to appreciate it, then often the academic world doesn't seem to like it. I hope none of them hear this and find that insulting because I don't mean it to be, because they're incredibly brilliant people who have absolutely moved the discipline. But most of them are people that wouldn't get 10 views on YouTube.
Yeah. And so I'm so glad you didn't hear of Simon Schama. I want you to look him up. He's probably, I bet The Power of Art is available on YouTube at this point, but I would love for you to look him up and see if you get a kick out of him. I assume you would, because he's a storyteller like yourself, and I will never fault somebody for making art accessible to people in a way that's so fun, and in a way that tells a story. Because so many times you go to the museum and you think, this stuff is way over my head, and so if you can tell it in a fun way that has kind of emotion to it, I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is a history teacher in junior high is probably has more ability to help someone understand and be enthused about, and then create a career around history than a history teacher does at Harvard.
Yeah,
I mean, so you have to. That seems a lot to give up. But anybody, once you become really, really expert on something, you want to think that you're so expert that the average person just can't do what you're doing. That kind of happens wherever you are. So I don't think there's professional historians, or there's a lot of professional historians that teach at university or something like that who pay attention to the history guy. And if they did, I don't know that they would think highly of the channel. But I don't do a 4-hour documentary that's delving into Henry VIII's underwear. I tell a story. Mine are done within 15 to 20, maybe 20 minutes. But
yeah, and in the same vein, in what you said though about influence. Probably one of the greatest influences on my life was Mr. Powell in junior high. He ran the public speaking contest at our school. And he said, Tommy Schuller, you got to do the public speaking contest. He saw something in me that, he thought, you got to do that. So I got up and did the public speaking contest. I came in second place, but it was a wonderful second place because so many people were saying, you should have won it, and I almost got there. Anyway,
junior high was the first time I was invited to a speech competition. I happened to win mine.
You did.
It was for the Modern Woodman of America, and that was a bug for me. I did competitive speech all the way through college, and I was a finalist at the National Individual Events Tournament, and then I coached that in college for a long time. And I've moved away from that world, but there's never been anything that I've done that was more useful, more generally. I could go out and sell health insurance. I worked for in finance. I worked in health insurance, and then I came and made a YouTube channel. And if you can speak, if you can present, if you can understand basic things like what's the audience get from this, and what are they going to be interested in, and how do you find their interest rather than expecting them to be interested in you. If you understand those basic rules, you can succeed in so many. I mean, I wouldn't want to do brain surgery, but I was invited 2 years ago to speak in the NASA Speaker Series. And I got to go to the Ames Research Laboratory. And that was intimidating because I am clearly not a rocket scientist. And they literally are rocket scientists. And I was invited by the chief scientist at the Ames Research Laboratory to go talk about history of NASA. And if you can translate those things in a way that, people find interesting, that's a skill that will serve you. I mean, I occasionally appear on television. And a couple of those times when I'm on the shows, they'll have someone who's far more expert. I'm like, why are you talking to me when you got the guy that actually went and, did the archaeology or whatever? And they said, well, because he can't necessarily talk. And so one of the producers at once said, you're like the color guy. They're the play-by-play. You're the color guy. And that's not a bad lane to be in. And I think maybe that's part of the success behind my channel. I've always been able to tell a story and make people enjoy the story.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Lance, this was a great chat here, and thanks for doing it. I hope people check out your channel. You're not going to get many of my YouTube followers because I have hardly any, but
maybe I'll help you out.
Well, how's your Twitter following? Because
I'm pretty sure we have a Twitter account. I don't think we use, or X. It's not even Twitter now, is it?
It's X.
I never use it. I don't. First of all, I don't want it to come back and haunt me. But if I had a social media person, I probably would. But there's an account there, but I don't know the last time we probably posted on. For me, it's all YouTube. I mean, we've tried other places. I've got 17,000 followers on Facebook or something like that. We've tried other places that, the hope is that will bring them to the YouTube channel because this is where we're getting the money. And in the end, it really is the YouTube channel that's, driving the other media. So I don't know. Maybe we'll help you. Maybe I'll get you more YouTube audience, and maybe you'll give me a reason to
well, that's where it used to be back when the days it was Twitter. I sometimes wouldn't even bother to post there. I would go on Instagram and Facebook. That's where I got all my views. And, still I never did because I never paid enough attention, I think, to YouTube. But now it's switched. It's no longer Instagram. Facebook kind of stinks for live video for me now. But on Twitter, X, it's bigger than ever. So I'll get 100 views on YouTube, but I'll get 22,000 on X.
That's, it just, I mean, that might have to do with your content, and it might have to do with who goes to that channel. But I mean, it's, if you find your space, you find your space. And I hope you take this in the right tone here. My mother absolutely loves you. So
I love it. People's mother usually they say, my grandmother loves you.
You got me so much mom credit. I told her I was going to be on this show. She was like, "What?" I've been on a lot. I was in the Wall Street Journal. I was in Forbes magazine just for being the history guy. And I think probably I was at NASA. I think the thing that's most impressed her is that I was going to be on your podcast. So
I love it.
Thank you for having me here.
Oh yeah, I love it, and I love her. Tell her I said hello.
I will tell her you said hello. She will be quite impressed.
And if she wants a Sleepy Joe video, I've got your email now, so I can, if you want, I'll make a little, I'll email you, and I can make a Sleepy Joe video just for her.
Oh, that's fantastic. Are you on Cameo? You ever tried that?
Yes, I do Cameo.
Oh yeah, I do Cameo too. It's not a huge amount of money, but that's a perfect. I mean, what you do is actually perfect for that, because you can do it in that amount of time, and I'm sure people love it. She would love it. She would absolutely love it.
Well, thanks for joining us, and all continued success in the future.
Yeah, my pleasure. Continued success for you too. This was really my pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Lance.